श्रीशैलेशदयापात्रम् धीभक्त्यादिगुणार्णवम् यतीन्द्रप्रवणम् वन्दे रम्यजामातरम् मुनिम् लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भाम् नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्ताम् वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् यो नित्यम् अच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणम् प्रपद्ये लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसन्दष्टजीवजीवातवे नमः।
Asmad-Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad-Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmad-Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So we're continuing our discussion of Tattva Trayam by Pila Lokacharya. And so let's go back to the text. I think we're in the beginning of the 60s as far as the sutras are concerned. And we're in of course, the Tattva Traya is talking about there are three principles. And the three principles which we discuss in Tattva Traya are Chit, Achit, Ishvara. So we're in the Chit Prakarnam, which is the first part, which is about the individual souls. So we just got through explaining and giving examples and rationale and Shastric quotes, Shastric pramanas, Shastric proofs, scriptural proofs about the fact that there are a multiplicity of individual souls. So the multiplicity of individual souls was thus established by reasoning and authority of the scriptures. Okay, so we did start 61 a little bit, but we're going to continue from 61. So again, it says here, it will be seen from the essential nature of the individual soul, set out in aphorism 4, that there are some features which differentiate the individual soul from matter, and certain others which differentiate the soul from the Lord. There are also certain features common to, 1, the individual soul and matter, and 2, the individual soul and the Lord. And I think last time I was discussing all about how Madhva has this philosophy, Madhvacharya has this philosophy of Panchabheda, 5, that there are 3 things, right? The soul, the universe, the souls, the individual souls, or what I call Atmans or Jivatmans, matter, or this material universe, and the God, and the Lord, Ishvara, God. So the differences and similarities between these 3 things are expressed in the Vedanta philosophy. So Madhva says there are 5 types of difference. There's a difference between one soul and another soul, right? So there's chit difference. There's difference between one piece of matter and another piece of matter. There's difference between matter and soul. There's difference between God and matter, and there's difference between God and soul, and the individual soul, the Atman and the Paramatman. So these are 5 types of differences. Internally, between different forms of God, there's no difference, even though they may appear to be somewhat different in their leelas and things like this, Rama, Krishna, Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, different avatars of the Lord, but still, in essence, they're the same. So this is it, Madhva's idea of Panchabheda. Similarly here, Pila Lokacharya, what he's saying is, he's saying that there are some things which are similar between the soul and God, between the soul and matter. And there are some things which are dissimilar. So there are also certain features common to, 1, the individual soul and matter, and 2, the individual soul and the Lord. The common characteristic of all the 3 entities is that they are eternal. They're all eternal. So all 3 principles are eternal. Of course, we understand, it's a little bit beyond our understanding that God is the source, Ishvara is the source of all those, of the other 2, of the individual souls and of matter of the universe. At the same time, the individual souls are never considered to be created, they're considered to be eternal. Same thing with the universe. The universe is eternal, but it goes through different phases of creation, sustenance, dissolution, and recreation, like that. which we call Shristi, Stiti, and Laya, or Pralaya, or Samhara. So Shristi means creation, Stiti means maintenance, Laya or Pralaya means destruction. It can also be termed as Samhara. Okay, so a common characteristic of all the three entities is that they're all eternal. Okay, being controlled and supported by the Lord, right? That's another common characteristic. The other two are controlled and supported by the Lord. The Lord controls and supports the universe. He controls and supports the souls. Okay. Being dependent on him, being controlled, supported, and dependent upon him are common to the individual soul and matter. So I also mentioned in Madhva's book, Tattva Sankhya, that where Sankhya means counting or enumeration of tattvas, of principles, that he starts out with two basic categories of principles. There's the independent principle, and there's the dependent principles. The independent principle is God. He's completely independent. That is called Swatantra. Swatantra means independent. Then everybody else, everything else, including Mahalakshmi, right, including his sponsor, are called Paratantra. They're dependent upon him. They're all dependent. So Mahalakshmi, the individual souls, the universe, everything else is dependent upon the God. So there's dependent and independent. In the dependent category is only God. In the independent category is everything else. So that's Tattva Sankhya by Madhvacharya, right? So we also agree with that. We don't have any different ideas. So here it's being explained by Pilalokacharya, the same thing, that what the souls, the individual souls and matter have in common with each other, the souls and matter, is that they're all controlled, supported, and dependent upon the Lord. Bliss intelligence being unmanifest to the senses, non-comprehensibility, non-changeability, are all properties common to the Lord and the individual soul. Okay, so what do the individual soul and the Lord have in common? Bliss, right? Insentient matter or the universe does not experience bliss because it's not sentient. You have to be sentient, you have to be conscious, you have to have consciousness, right, to experience bliss. Bliss is a type of consciousness, right? I feel blissful. I don't feel blissful. I feel bad, right? I feel morose, or I feel upset, or I feel whatever it is. So bliss is a type of consciousness. You have to have consciousness to experience bliss. Intelligence, ordinary matter is not intelligent. It's insentient, so therefore it's unintelligent. There's no intelligence there. Being manifest to the senses. Being manifest to the senses. That's an interesting point. Being manifest to the senses. So we perceive. I'm not quite sure what that actually, exactly what that means in that sense, because obviously matter is manifest to the senses. Anyway, the soul and God that he's saying here, that needs more further elucidation. I'm not quite sure about that. Non-comprehensibility. Comprehensibility means understanding. Non-comprehensibility means not understanding, not to be understood. Okay, not sure about that either. Non-changeability. Well, there we understand. Okay, God and the soul are spiritual, right? And therefore they don't change. In essence, they don't change. So whereas matter goes through these different changes of which I was describing of creation, maintenance, destruction, changing into different forms. Excuse me. The unique attribute of the individual soul that stamps it out exclusively from the other two entities is, however, its knowledge, right? Gyatritva, its knowledge harnessed to dependence or sheshatva on the Lord. So the individual soul is a servant, and its knowledge, its consciousness is of being a servant. If its consciousness is is purified, if there's nothing covering its consciousness, when its consciousness is revealed, its true consciousness is revealed, its consciousness is of being a servant or a slave or a piece of property of the Lord. So harnessed to dependence on the Lord, right? Sheshatva, dependence. Knowledge is common to both the soul and the Lord. Knowledge is common to both the soul and the Lord. So both the soul and the Lord, being sentient beings, can experience knowledge. While dependence on the Lord is common to both the soul and matter. So although matter is dependent also on the Lord, right, which we just said that everything else is paratantra, dependent on the Lord is independent, right? Still, because matter doesn't have any sentience, right, it doesn't have any knowledge of being dependent. It doesn't have this consciousness of being a servant or being a slave, right? So it's just dull matter. So it's only dependence-based and dependence-oriented knowledge that is the characteristic attribute of the soul. Dependence-based or dependence-oriented knowledge. That is the characteristic of the soul. It's not the characteristic of God. He's not dependent or he's not dependent, and therefore he doesn't think that he's dependent. Matter doesn't think at all, so therefore the knowledge of being dependent is not there in matter. Right? It is dependent on the Lord, but it doesn't have any knowledge because it's insentient. So continuing on with Sutra 62 to 68. The knowledge possessed by the individual soul, like its essential nature, an eternal substance, luminous and blissful. The knowledge possessed by the individual soul is, like its essential nature, an eternal substance, luminous and blissful. Okay, so he's talking about the knowledge of the soul. The difference between the soul's essential nature and its attributive knowledge is, however, as follows. So he made two columns here. So the essential nature of the soul, number one, is the possessor of knowledge as an attribute. Right. So first of all, we should understand that there are substances and attributes. Attributes are things also, but they're subtle things. And substance and attribute the attributes adhere in the substance. You can't separate the attribute from the substance. It is the possessor of knowledge as an attribute. So you can't separate knowledge from the soul, right? As in Europe, Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." So the thinking process can't be separated from the individual. The individual has consciousness and therefore he thinks and therefore he has knowledge. So it is an attribute of the soul. Knowledge is an attribute of the soul. Two, it is incapable of undergoing changes of contraction and expansion. Now, the knowledge, the soul itself, doesn't contract or expand. We saw before there was a discussion about the Jains. The Jains have this idea that there's a soul that goes from body to body. And in the body of an ant, it's very small. In the body of an elephant, it's very big. It expands to cover the material body of whatever animal or whatever human being it's in, like that. Although we do understand that the consciousness of the soul can pervade the body of an elephant and the body of a human being or the body of an ant, but the soul itself doesn't expand. The soul itself doesn't expand or contract. So knowledge is capable. Knowledge, however, right? Knowledge, however. So okay, so I understand what's going on here. So we're juxtaposing. We're examining the difference between knowledge and the essential nature of the soul. So the soul doesn't go through expansion or contraction, but the knowledge of the soul can go through expansion and contraction. In liberation or moksha, the soul's knowledge is expanded unlimitedly. In this material world where we're covered by different illusions, misapprehensions, right? It is considered to be contracted or covered. So three, the essential nature of this third essential nature of the soul, it's self-luminous. does not reveal anything other than itself. Does not reveal anything other than itself. Knowledge, however, reveals objects other than itself. Knowledge reveals objects other than itself. So through knowledge, we can reveal the reality of things outside of the soul. Number 4 is atomic in size. Right, the soul is atomic in size. So in the scriptures, it gives an example that the soul is like the size of 10,000th the size of the tip of a hair. That's just an analogy to explain to us that it's very, very subtle and very, very atomic, minute. So just like a spark, or in relationship to a fire. So the fire may be the origin of the spark, like the Lord is the origin of the soul, but the spark is very minute. The Lord is very, very big. So whereas knowledge is expansive and infinite in size. Right? Once if there's no more illusion, then knowledge becomes expanded unlimitedly. Although A above, I don't know where A above is. Interesting. Depicts the natural tendency of knowledge. The actual position is that the knowledge of only some, the free Nityasuris, remains infinite at all times. Okay. So when we're talking about infinite knowledge, the knowledge of those persons in Vaikuntha, those persons who are in moksha or liberated, that their knowledge is completely free at all times and completely infinite in all times. The knowledge of bound souls is not infinite at any time. It's covered, but very much contracted, while the knowledge of the released souls is infinite certain times, that is after liberation from the bondage of samsara, and contracted at other times, that is the pre-liberation period. So 3 types of souls again, which we were discussing. Those who are in bondage, their knowledge is limited. Those who are released, those who have always been released from bondage, have never been in bondage, their knowledge is always infinite. And the ones that were in bondage and became liberated had contracted knowledge, and then their knowledge was expanded to be unlimited in the period of liberation. So if knowledge is eternal, as stated a little earlier, how is one to appreciate statements such as knowledge has dawned on me or knowledge is extinct? It needs to be clarified that on attaining salvation, the knowledge of the individual becomes infinite and is thus capable of comprehending everything. Sarvam ha pasya pasyati sa chanantyaya kalpate. I'm not sure where those quotes are from, but we have to look them up if we want to go deeper into that. But while in the state of bondage, knowledge gets alternatively contracted and expanded according to the incidence of karma and its productivity and the nature of comprehension through the sense organs. Right. So these are all factors which limit our knowledge here in this material world as bound souls. The knowledge that is apprehended through the sense organs, though in effect one and the same, appears to have different facets relative to the particular sense organs employed: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, etc. And the knowledge of form, sound, taste, respectively projected thereby. Right? So we gain knowledge through the senses. We understand there are 5 knowledge acquiring senses. So we have material organs that help us do that. The mind also helps to analyze the sense data, which comes in through the senses, the jnana, what are called jnanendriyas, the knowledge acquiring senses, and make sense of them. So there are different types of knowledge. So there's the visual knowledge, the audible knowledge, the tactile knowledge, etc., etc. There's different types of knowledge according to the sense which perceives that knowledge. 69 to 72. The attributive knowledge of the soul is treated as a substance because, number 1, the substratum of actions It's the substratum, it's the basis of actions like contraction and expansion. The substratum or the basis of qualities like conjunction and disjunction. Okay, this is getting very technical because there are different ideas in the science of epistemology according to different schools of Vedanta, and they rate some of these things as being also pramanas. But here, what he's explaining is that the attributive knowledge of the soul, right, is treated as a substance because number one, it's the basis of actions like contraction and expansion. It's also like conjunction and disjunction, right? And it's self-luminous. It's self-luminous, right? So knowledge not only shows us other things, but it also proves to us that we exist. So it's self-luminous, just like the example was given of lighting a lamp. The lamp, if you light a lamp in a dark room, you see everything in the room. It reveals other things, but it also reveals itself. It's the lamp. So kriyashrayo dravyam, gunashrayo dravyam, jnanam dravyam, ajadatvat, yat, ajadatvat, tat dravyam. So knowledge, though self-luminous, ajada, does not manifest itself during deep slumber or swoon, etc. Swoon meaning fainting, when people lose consciousness, or deep sleep where there's no dreams. When there's there's a difference between different states of consciousness in normally in Sanskrit, we talk about different states of consciousness. We talk about waking, then we talk about sleeping, which includes dreaming. That sleeping, which includes dreaming, that also there's this type of consciousness there because there's consciousness of the dream. And then there's deep sleep where there's no dreams. And then there's a fourth state of consciousness, which is called samadhi or turiya, where one is in tune with spiritual things. So knowledge, though self-luminous, ajada, right? Self-luminous, ajada, which means it's not dull. It can't be classified exactly as dull matter. Does not manifest itself in deep sleep or deep slumber, swoon, etc., because there is no scope for its spread. There being nothing to be comprehended then. 73 to 76. While concluding this section, let us examine why this attributive knowledge is said to be blissful. It is blissful when it reveals the objects comprehended by it. A doubt might instantly arise whether it is so in all cases, and whether, for example, comprehension of objects like poison, lethal weapons, etc., is not terrifying. This is resolved by pointing out that such a feeling is due to a lack of correct perspective on the part of the individual whose vision is blurred by being bound over by his karma. He suffers from the illusory notion that the body is the soul and fails to perceive the Lord's immanence in all things that exists. Jagat sarvam shariram te. Again, this is talking about the shariri bhava, the idea that the universe and the souls of the body of God. So what it says here is Jagat sarvam shariram te, your body. The whole universe is your body, O Lord. Tani sarvani tad vapahu, basically meaning the same thing, due to their association with the Lord, who is the soul of all substances, including the soul. He's the soul of the soul, and he's the soul of all matter. He's the soul of everything. So all of them should naturally be desirable, and if, however, they are apprehended differently by different persons to understand this. So above is saying, well, what about this idea that that if everything that we comprehend is blissful, if we have real knowledge, we understand everything to be blissful because we understand everything, the basis of everything to be the Lord, right? But if we see it as separate from the Lord, then we might see something as poison or lethal weapons or something. We might see this as not being blissful because we don't see the Lord within it. But if we see everything as having the Lord as the basis of it, the Lord is the basis of everything, is the soul of everything. He's within everything. So then we no longer have any we no longer have any difference of feeling towards these things. We're in bliss when we apprehend anything, because everything is the body of the Lord, in a sense. So, due to their association with the Lord, who is the soul of all substances, all of them should naturally be desirable. And if, however, they are apprehended differently by different persons, the defect lies not in the things themselves, but in the individuals because of their limitations. So because of our limitations of thinking of not understanding reality, the reality is that matter and the souls, the individual souls, are the body of God, because we don't understand that. Therefore, we see things as being different and see them, some things like poison as being horrible, and some other things like, mangoes or whatever it is, as being wonderful, as being nice. So we see good and bad because of that. So, but it might be asked whether a thing is not desirable by itself, irrespective of its association with the Lord, such as sandalwood paste or flowers, etc. So, okay, that's all right. That explains away the things like terrible weapons and poison that we see. Actually, they're good things because they're the body of the Lord. Also, sandalwood paste and flowers are also the body of the Lord. The answer is one man's food is another man's poison. Interesting. The very things that are relished by an individual at certain times in particular places are eschewed or given up by him at other times and other places. So then, this is not the natural state of things. All substances forming the body of the Lord are inherently sweet and desirable. All things, all the souls, all the universe, and viewed in this correct perspective, knowledge is blissful. All knowledge is blissful, right? Because the process of knowledge is we have to have a knower, and we have to have something which is to be known, and then there's a process of knowing, right? So to have knowledge, there must be something outside the knower to be known. Yeah. So whatever's there, what is there? There's the three. What are we knowing? There's three principles to be known: souls, matter, and God. All of these things, if we understand them correctly, we understand them in relationship to God. So obviously, if people become realized of God or something, they become blissful. What about if they become realized of the universe, realized of the true nature of the individual selves, the individual souls? They also become blissful because of that, right? In fact, this is described in the third part of the Taittiriya Upanishad, where Bhrigu, who's a rishi, goes to his father Varuna, and he says to him, "What is Brahman? What is spirit?" Right? Actually, everything is spirit, ultimately. Everything is spiritual because everything comes from the Lord. Everything is created by the Lord, maintained by the Lord, destroyed by the Lord. Everything is the body of the Lord because the Lord pervades everything. So therefore, everything in a sense is spiritual, which is why we say in the Upanishads, Aham Brahmasmi, I am spiritual. I am spiritual, but all this is spiritual also. So if we see with the correct perspective, everything is spiritual, and therefore everything is blissful, and therefore all knowledge, because if we know anything, to know anything, the knowledge must therefore also be blissful. The knowledge is blissful. Right knowledge is blissful. Right? Correct knowledge is blissful, because correct knowledge means that we understand everything as it is. Everything as it is the body of the Lord, and therefore is connected to the Lord, and therefore consciousness of that is blissful. So all substances forming the bodies of the Lord are inherently sweet and desirable, and viewed in the correct perspective, knowledge is blissful when it reveals the objects comprehended by it. This is clearly brought out by the following verse or sloka from Vishnu Purana. Summing up, this section deals with the indispensability of knowledge of Tattva Traya. It's indispensable to have a knowledge. It's a foundational thing to have a knowledge of these three principles, right? The fundamental truths, the three fundamental truths to the mumukshu, the aspirant of moksha. So the summary of this section, this first section of Chitprakarana, is that we should understand what these three truths are, and it's fundamental to understanding how to then attain moksha. right? The three fundamental truths, principles or entities, namely the sentient beings, Chit, the Atmans, the Jivatmans, the non-sentient matter, Achit, and the Lord Ishvara, right? So the first section also delineated that. The essence, the essential nature and attributes of sentient beings, right? We discussed about that. What is the nature and essence of the individual souls, right? We said we enumerated three different types of souls. We explained about them. We explained about how they see things, etc. Multiplicity of the individual souls, refutation of the argument of it that a single soul manifests itself through different bodies, okay, which is the Advaitic idea. The non-dualists or the monists, they have this idea that there's only one supreme soul, and somehow or other it manifests itself in these different bodies, that you and I are all one, or all manifested. So because of ignorance, we think that we're separate. So this was also refuted. This was refuted with logic, right? And also with quotes from the Puranas, from the Shruti, from the Upanishads. Right, the unique characteristics of the individual soul were brought out. We were discussing about not only the unique characteristics of the soul, but also of matter and also of the Lord. And we were juxtaposing, we were comparing those just previously. And then we have the difference between the essential nature of the soul and its attributive knowledge, right? That was explained. And the three categories of souls and disparities in their standards of knowledge. Also, an elucidation of the self-luminosity and blissfulness of knowledge. This is just what we just covered. Second prakaranam, right? The Achit prakaranam, or about non-sentient matter. So, text 77 to 78, we now pass on to the study of the characteristics of Achit, or insentient matter, non-sentient matter, the second of the three tattvas or entities referred to at the beginning of section 1. Now, it's interesting. Why do we take up these principles, these three principles in this order? The first principle being the soul. Why do we take up that first? Knowledge is an attribute of the soul. So therefore, that's why we take up the individual soul first, right? As I keep quoting Descartes, I think therefore I am. So the first thing that we know, we talk to anybody. If you want to start a philosophical conversation with anybody, you start out with the idea of axiomatic truths. The first axiomatic truth that we understand is that we exist, and therefore, because we exist and we think we're sentient beings, we can know something, right? The first thing that we know is we know that we exist, right? So therefore, that's why that is the first section of any book, pretty much in spiritual, and beyond even Hinduism and Vaishnavism. In other religions also, the understanding of the soul will be a very basic and first step in any philosophical school or religion. So now we pass on to Achit, an understanding of the universe, understanding of insentient matter. The non-sentient things are totally devoid of knowledge. Jnana sunya. Sunya means devoid, or void, or nothingness. Sunya, right? So jnana sunya means absolutely no knowledge. Absolutely no knowledge. So insentient things, the first thing we want to say about them is matter has absolutely no knowledge, because it has no consciousness. So therefore, it has no knowledge. We can't say that knowledge is an attribute of matter. In fact, what it's saying here is the exact opposite. That if we want to give an attribute to matter, the first attribute of matter is that it has no knowledge. That's the first attribute of matter. And liable to change its state, vikaras pada. Right? It can change its state, whereas the soul and God never change their state. Okay, so this just the antithesis or the opposite, complete opposite of Chit, sentient beings. Sentient beings have knowledge, and we're talking about the soul here. The soul has knowledge, God has knowledge, and God and the soul don't change. Right? Being essentially of that type of spirit, right? characterized by knowledge and non-changeability. So these first of all, let's say, okay, so God and the soul are characterized by the attributes of knowledge and non-changeability, or being eternally the same. Whereas matter is different from that, has no knowledge, jnana sunya, and can change. Achit is of three kinds. Okay, so he's going to delineate the types of matter. So we have pure sattva, mixed sattva, sattva sunya, right? That's what he's saying. He's making these three categories here. So he's saying, what does sattva mean? Sattva. The word sat means eternality, but sattva means is a mode. There are these different modes or gunas, qualities. The quality of sattva is lightness, uplifting, goodness, purity, right? So pure sattva, mixed sattva, and sattva sunya. Sattva sunya means devoid of sattva, right? So this is what he gives these three names to, these three categories of achit, or matter. That is to say, those that are based solely in sattva, right, purity, those that are based in an admixture of all the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and those that are not linked to any of the three gunas. Those that are not linked to any of the three gunas. In the first category of things, Shuddha Sattva, or pure sattva, is the supreme heaven, or Sri Vaikuntham, right? So he says, what would be an idea of Shuddha Sattva? What would be an idea, or what would be the category that the spiritual world comes under? The actual abode of Lord Vishnu, or of God, right? He would call that Shuddha Sattva. That is called Shuddha Sattva. It is untainted by rajas and tamas, so it doesn't have passion and ignorance at all in any way. And he gives some quotations here to explain that. And he says, it is eternal. And of course, these things, because we can't go there and we don't know anybody who's been there and who's come back and who's told us about it. So it's beyond, the spiritual world is beyond material sense perception. It's beyond our empirical knowledge, beyond our sense perception. So therefore, we can only understand it by taking the word of scriptural authority about it. It's like that. So there's no point in really arguing about this, right? We take what it says in the Shruti and the Smritis, right, about Sri Vaikuntham, and we just have to accept that on faith. So it is untainted by rajas and tamas, right? It is eternal. It is productive of knowledge and bliss. It does not come into being as a result of karma, actions of sentient beings, and the possessions coveted by them. It is projected solely by the will of the Lord for his enjoyment, in the form of towers and terraces, halls and mansions, etc., etc. Right. So whatever is there in the world of God, in the supreme abode, that is all the Satya Sankalpa, that is all the divine will of the Supreme Lord. That the way he wants it to be. It has nothing to do with this material world, which evolves according to the actions and the karmas of the different living beings, and other things also. So the Lord, for his enjoyment, so of limitless splendor, far surpassing the brilliance of even the sun and fire, it is so vast that it cannot be measured by the eternally free Nityasuris. So that's very interesting. Okay, so that's a little bit of hyperbole there. We're saying that the Nityasuris have unlimited knowledge. We just got finished saying that those persons in liberation, right, the eternally free souls, or even the muktas, those who become liberated, have unlimited knowledge. If they have unlimited knowledge, then he's saying here, but even those with unlimited knowledge can't understand the vastness of Vaikuntha, the vastness of the spiritual world. The emancipated souls, the muktas, or even the Lord himself. So he's saying even the Lord himself, or even the muktas, or even the Nityasuris, can understand the vastness of Sri Vaikuntha. It is such a great marvel indeed. Okay, so Sri Vaikuntha, the idea is it's just given an example. It said it's unlimited. It's given an example that it is called Tripad Vibhuti, whereas this material world is called Ekpad Vibhuti. In the scriptures, it says this material world is Ekpad Vibhuti. Vibhuti means the what's created by the Lord. It's his manifestation. Vibhuti means manifestation. His manifestation. So he has that manifestation and this manifestation. There are those two different things: there's the spiritual world and the material world. And to give you an idea of the difference in size, if we can really say there's a size because it's supposed to be unlimited, they say that one is tripad, or three times, and the three parts and the one part. So if you imagine everything, the spiritual and material world is four parts. 3/4 of it is the spiritual world and 1/4 is the material world. That's the point. That's the analogy given. You can't measure it empirically. So therefore the greatness of it can't be known. So it is self-luminous, ajada. So unlike this material universe, which is not self-luminous, we need stars and we need fires and we need the sun and the moon and fire and things to light up the places here in this material world. But there, everything is self-luminous. There's no need of sun or moon or fire to light up things. It's self-luminous. Although according to the view of a limited section, it is non-luminous. Jada, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Being self-luminous, it manifests itself unaided by knowledge to the ever-free and emancipated souls. It manifests itself to the ever-free and the emancipated souls, being the nityas and the muktas. It does not, however, manifest itself to the bound souls. Right, so those persons who are liberated, they can enjoy it and they can see it, they can understand it. But to the bound souls, of course, it's covered because they're here in this material world. They can't see it, they can't experience it. So it does not manifest itself. It does not, however, manifest itself to the bound souls still involved in the cycle of birth and death. Even as self-luminous knowledge of the individual souls gets blurred by their deeds, karma, in the pre-liberation period, right? So we can only understand this material world in our present state, in non-liberated state. The individual souls and their knowledge are both described in the section 1 of self-luminous ajada, right? The individual souls and their knowledge, which were described in section 1, which we just finished, as self-luminous ajada, not insentient, not dull matter. And now matter in the first category of pure sattva is also said to be self-luminous. So what we're doing is we're enumerating all these different possibilities. So there's mixtures of all these qualities. So the spiritual world is self-luminous, and yet it is insentient. It's insentient, but it's self-luminous. Interesting. So, and therefore it becomes necessary to bring out the distinction between this category of matter and the individual souls and their knowledge. So there's a difference between the spiritual world and the individual souls, because the individual souls are conscious, the spiritual world is not conscious. And therefore, although it's self-luminous in the same way as the individual soul is self-luminous, right? And therefore, it becomes necessary to bring out the distinction between the category of matter and the individual souls and their knowledge. The former, pure sattva, spiritual world, does not manifest itself as I, and is therefore unlike the souls. It evolves into bodies, etc., and thus differs from the soul and knowledge. Unlike knowledge, it projects itself unaided by other objects, being the source of sound, touch, etc. The next category is called mixed sattva. So that's almost incomprehensible, the understanding of the spiritual world. But to give you an idea, he's saying that the spiritual world is self-luminous, but it is not conscious. It's not sentient. The next category is called mixed sattva. That is mixed sattva, rajas, tamas, right? Or mixed the different modes. We're going to talk about the material world here. Known severally as prakriti, avidya. Prakriti means material nature. Avidya means ignorance. Maya means illusion, right? It is sattva mixed with the other two gunas, namely rajas and tamas. So here in this material world, we see a mixture, always see a mixture. The incidence of rajas and tamas, or passion and ignorance, is responsible for befogging. It's an interesting word, befogging or illusioning the individual souls, operating as a screen, veiling the knowledge and bliss of bound souls. It is not mere diminution or disappearance of knowledge and bliss, but the mischief goes farther, landing the individual soul in perversion of knowledge, arrogating to itself independence, mistaking the body for the soul, coveting the transient worldly pleasures, losing sight of the real and ultimate goal, resorting to means other than the Lord, etc. So these are all things that happen because of the admixture of the different gunas in this material world, the different material modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance. It's eternal. That is to say, it's not liable to fluctuations such as appearing at certain times and disappearing thereafter to reappear. It serves as the Lord's instrument in his sporting activities, such as the creation of the universe. It undergoes change, homogeneous as well as heterogeneous, at different places and different times. Homogeneous, for example, when there is no preponderance of any one guna attribute over the other two, and in the subtle sukshma state, when there is no distinction of names and forms, right? So that is, okay, in the Sankhya system of creation, there is what we call Mula Prakriti, which is also called, there's another name for it, I think too. Mula Prakriti is the state that the universe was in before the different elements separated out, a conglomeration of material elements. So that's what he's talking about here, when it's homogeneous. When it becomes heterogeneous, right, when the creation occurs, the different elements come out, right, and therefore they're known as by distinct names. So the heterogeneousness, when the milieu changes into a gross or stula state, right, a gross state involving the distinction of names and forms and fluctuating tempo of the gunas, the different times alluded to are the point of time at which creation took place, and again, that at which dissolution comes about. Okay, so the overall point here is that the material nature always exists. It always exists, it's eternal, like that. But it doesn't always exist in the same form. It exists before creation, it exists in a homogeneous form. When creation occurs, it becomes heterogeneous. It evolves into different states, right? Again, it's wound up and it becomes a homogeneous form again after dissolution or destruction. It's not completely destroyed, right? It always exists, but it just changes its form. It is called Prakriti or unmodified cause because it produces several changes of state. With its three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, these follow the seven principles, namely Mahat. Well, that was what I was thinking of. Mahat. Mahat is a conglomeration of these things. Mahat, ahankar, subtle matter, tanmatra of sound, right? So this is the order of creation he's talking about here, which is according to the Sankhya theory of evolution. The subtle matter, tanmatra of sound, the subtle matter of touch, color, taste, and smell. It is also known as avidya or ignorance, veiling knowledge. It is also called maya or wonder. Maya to me means illusion. Here he's translating it as wonder, as it produces a wonderful variety, variegated forms of creation. This mishra sattva or mixed sattva, mixed goodness, comprises 24 principles as enumerated in the Tiruvai 10.7.8. We don't know that verse, but we could look it up. These are the 5 potent objects of the senses, 5 sense objects, the 5 sense organs, the 5 elements, Prakriti, Mahat, Ahankar, Manas, mind. So this is what we're calling 24 principles. Of these, the first principle of Prakriti, otherwise known as Pradhana, that's another way of saying Mahat here. That's what I was thinking of. The conglomeration of homogeneous elements in the beginning before creation is called also Pradhana or Avyakta. Avyakta means non-pervasive, avyakta. Avyakta means seen. Avyakta means non-seen or imperceptible, right? Pradhana or avyakta, right? Prakriti has already been defined. Pradhana means the primary instrument of the Lord's sporting activities. So from the Pradhana or the Mahat comes this creation. Avyakta means the difference in its attributes is not distinctly discernible in that subtle state. In the subtle state, the heterogeneous elements have not been created. It stands possessed of the states known as the avibhakta tamas, vibhakta tamas, and akshara. The state obtaining to the time of dissolution of the universe is referred to as avibhakta tamas. That is, there is no scope then for differentiation by name and form after dissolution. Everything enters back into the body of the Lord and then is recreated again. When the Lord resolves to create the universe, there is vibhakta tamas, or differentiation of things by name and form. By akshara, which means indestructible, right, is meant that situation when the individual souls in their subtle state, are seen promiscuously mixed up with matter, like unto sea drenched with water, about to disintegrate. Okay, so akshara means the situation where the individual souls in their subtle state, the souls accompany the bound souls in this material world. They accompany matter in the form of before creation and after creation, during creation and after the end of the creation. The souls are always there. The individual bound souls are still there, but sometimes they are in what's called Sushupti. After the universe enters back into the body of God, they're in the type of deep sleep, and they're considered to be in a subtle state. They don't have gross material bodies because those gross material bodies don't exist. The elements don't exist separately. So in that stage, they're called akshara. They're not actually destroyed, right? They're not actually destroyed, but they just don't have any material bodies at that time. Yeah, okay, so Vinitra is just saying that it's interesting that the spiritual world is called, but there's a, okay, so the point he's making in the chat there is that just the point that we covered just before was that the spiritual world, when describing the spiritual world, is a type of spiritual matter. Okay, unlike, in some other Vaishnava Sampradayas, they don't really get into a delineation of what the spiritual world is made of. But here, the Sri Vaishnavas have thought about it very deeply. They've looked in the scriptures and what they see from the scriptures, because there's no other way to see it, right? We can't empirically or logically understand it, right? So we can't use Pratyakshara Anumana to investigate the spiritual world. So we have to look in what it says in the scriptures, and from scriptures we understand the nature of the spiritual world is a type of spiritual matter, right? It is self-luminous, but it's not conscious, right? So it gives some understanding to it. beyond that understanding is very difficult to explain because we can't experience it until we go there. Okay, so from Prakriti, continuing on what we're talking about Prakriti here, from Prakriti, the aforementioned modifications, namely Mahat, etc., arise, right, through inequalities among the three gunas. So because the gunas are in flux, and there's sometimes more sattva, more rajas, more tamas, more goodness, more passion, more ignorance than the others, right? Because of that, there are different modifications, and the evolution of the different heterogeneous elements occurs. Even so, they're not distinguishable in the subtle state of Mula Prakriti. So again, if we say Pradhana, Mahat, whatever it is, or Mula Prakriti, these are all terms which are used for the conglomeration of homogeneous matter before the actual creation and distinction into different elements. When they maintain parity amongst themselves, but are clearly manifest in the gross state, when the said parity is disturbed and changes of state are undergone. So when there's a disturbance in that, and there's different amounts of goodness, passion, and ignorance, then that accounts for the creation of the different elements. In the differentiated state, the essential nature of these three attributes has to be gauged from the physical effect each one produces, as well as from the psychological and moral correlates. Thus, sattva is known to produce knowledge and bliss, and it promotes contacts with both and an abiding love for them. Okay, so now he's going into explanation of the three different modes, the three different gunas, and what each guna means. So here he's talking about sattva, goodness, and he says it produces knowledge, it produces bliss, it promotes contacts with both knowledge and bliss, and an abiding love for them. Rajas, or passion, engenders sexual desire and attachment to the sense objects. Tamas lands one in perverse knowledge, right? Or we could say ignorance, right? Inattentiveness, indolence, and sleep or inactivity. When these attributes are in equal proportions, Prakriti, as also, and then in the Tamil here is just a quotation from Tiruvai Moli that was mentioned, which was given up here as a footnote, because in that particular pasuram, in that particular verse by Namalwar, he has explained the 24 principles of matter. Right, the 25th principle, of course, is the soul, but the 24 principles of matter, like that. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we don't get all 24 mentioned. We just get five gross and 8 subtle. Excuse me, 5 gross and 3 subtle, making a total of 8 separated elements. But if we add to them the working senses, the knowledge acquiring senses, which are 5 each. That's another 10, so it's 18. And then we have the mind intelligence. We have some other things, and we make it up to 24. So that's all explained into that quote from Tiruvai Moli. So getting back to this, to tamas, the rajas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, when these attributes are in equal proportions, prakriti, or the original material nature, was also in an unmodified state without distinction of name and form, right? So when sattvas, raja, and tamas are in an equal form in the material world, that's before creation. And these attributes are not manifest. So when all of these things, these attributes of sattva, rajas, and tamas that we just discussed about, producing knowledge and bliss, engendering sexual desire and attachment, perverse knowledge and inattentiveness, indolence, and sleep. These things are in equanimity, and these things are equal, like that. It's before creation, and therefore there is no distinction between the different elements in material nature. On the other hand, when they're in unequal proportions, Prakriti, as already stated, undergoes modifications, and the attributes become manifest to perception and inference. Right, so we only can perceive the differences in the different elements or different aspects of the material world after creation, when the modes are in different proportions or different percentages to each other, of the transformations which the inequalities of the transformations which the inequalities among the three attributes produce, Mahat, or the great principle, right? Mahat literally means the great principle, the original great principle, right? Comes first. This, again, is of three kinds. So we have Sattvika Mahat, Rajasika Mahat, and Tamasika Mahat. Mahat, or Buddhi means intelligence, are of three kinds, namely Sattvika, Rajasa, and Tamasa. So Buddhi is the medium through which the individual cognizes the external world. So an individual will have also intelligence of three kinds: sattvic intelligence, rajasic intelligence, and tamasic intelligence, and produces in him the power of determination with a bias, either sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic bias, dictated by the inequalities of the attributes. So depending upon his body and his mind and his karmas, like that, there's an inequality that gives us the example, that explains to us the different nature of different beings, right? There's a sattvic being, a being which is more sattvic, a being which is more rajasic, a being which is more tamasic, like that. His intelligence is controlled by that more, or is more in that way. So dictated by the inequalities of the attributes. From this Mahat, right, arises ahankar, or egoism, which in turn is of three kinds: Vaikarika, Taijasa, and Bhutadi, which are: Vaikarika is sattvic ego, Taijasa is rajasic ego, and Bhutadi is tamasic ego, depending on the spell of the particular guna or attribute. Ahankar is responsible, ahankar or egoism, self-ego, false ego, is responsible for the attachment of to one's body. From Vaikarika, with its sattvic bias, 11 organs are produced. He's going through the system of Sankhya creation here. These are the 5 sensory organs consisting of ear, skin, eye, tongue, and nose. The 5 motor organs comprising of speech, hands, tongue, hands, legs, organs of procreation, organs of excretion, and manas, or the mind, the faculty of attention, are produced, right? So all these things are produced from Vaikarika, which is a sattvic bias. When Prakriti goes through a sattvic bias, it creates these things. From Bhutadi, a type of ahankara, the Bhutadi type of ahankara, which was the tamasic type of ahankara, with the bias in tamas, is generated the subtle base or tanmatra of sound. The subtle base of sound arises from the subtle base of sound arises the spatial ether from the subtle base of touch. From the latter, the subtle base of touch, arises air or vayu, and the subtle base of color and form. And from this base, or the subtle base of color and form, emerges fire or agni, and the subtle base of taste. Right? Subtle base here is a translation of the word tanmatra. From the subtle base of taste springs up water, and the subtle base of odor. From the subtle base of odor results prithvi, or earth, or matter, right? Solid matter, whose characteristic is smell. So this is the idea of Sankhya evolution of elements. So the elements themselves, we can understand, okay, the senses come from a sattvic bias, right? The tamasic bias, right, creates the elements. On the four subtle bases or tanmatras beginning with the subtle base of touch are the effects produced by the four elements beginning with the spatial ether, right, or sky, which is akash, and are causes that produce four elements beginning with air, right? So we have space, air, and it gets subtle: air, water, fire, earth, like that. So getting more and more gross. Putting it more lucidly, from the subtle base of sound is born the element of spatial ether. From this element of spatial ether arises the subtle base of touch, from which again comes the element of air. From the element of air arises the subtle base of color and form, from which springs the element of fire. From the element of fire emerges the subtle base of taste, which in turn gives rise to the element of water. From the element of water evolves a subtle base, the tanmatra of odor or smell, which again gives birth to earth, prithvi, right, which is solid matter. The tanmatras or subtle bases are subtle states of the elements. Unlike the elements, which exhibit certain distinct characteristics, the tanmatras have no such characteristics and are therefore called avishesha or nondescript. The characteristics of earth and water are gentleness and agreeableness, santattva. Those of fire and air, ferocity or goratva, which is disagreeable. While the fifth element, akasha or air or space, spatial ether, is inert and indifferent, muda. When these elements combine, there ensues a combination of all these characteristics. The ahankara or the ego, the ahankara of the taijasa, the rajasic bias, right? With its rajasic bias, because we talked about the sattvic ahankara leading to the creation of the different indriyas, the different senses. We talked about the tamasic bias or ego or ahankara leading to the creation of gross elements, right? Subtle and gross elements, but all stula prakriti. But so we consider them, even air we consider to be a gross element. Okay, so gross elements. The tajas, now we're talking about the tajas ahankara, the rajasic ahankara, with its basis serves as an auxiliary to the other two types of ahankara during this operation. So the rajasic ahankara is like a catalyst for these other two ahankaras to act. Passion is involved in action, all action. So the creation of the senses and the creation of the elements involves action and therefore passion and therefore rajasika ahankara. So the bias serves as an auxiliary of the other two types of ahankara during their operation, like water helping the germination of a seed and or wind fanning a flame. Right. So a flame burns, but if you fan the flame, it'll burn more brightly, right? Because it's getting more oxygen. A seed will grow. If you give more water to the seed, it'll grow faster. So it's a catalyst. So the rajasic ahankara is a catalyst for the homogeneous mula prakriti to become the heterogeneous different elements of either through sattvic ahankara, the different senses, or tamasic ahankara, the different material elements. The ahankara of the sattvic type created the five sensory organs as follows. With the aid of the subtle base of sound, the ear was created. With the aid of the subtle base of touch, the skin and the eye was created, and the eye. The tongue and nose were likewise created with the aid of respective subtle bases, namely color and form, taste and odor. And then the five motor organs are evolved: speech with the aid of ear, hands with the aid of skin, legs with the aid of eye, and genital organs with the aid of tongue, an organ of excretion with the aid of nose. Okay, so So these things also have an evolution, right? So we can see the knowledge acquiring senses were created, and then the working senses. Manas, or mind, which is an auxiliary to all these 10 organs, as it is stated, is created by Ahankara itself without any other aid. Without any other aid. Some, like the Nyayikas, okay, so there's Saddarshanas, there are 6 main schools of Indian philosophy. One of them is called Nyaya, or logic. There's actually two schools of logic. There's what we call Nyaya, the original Nyaya school, and then there's the Navya Nyaya school, or the new form of Nyaya. So there's two different, slightly different, but they're all sort of merged into one nowadays. So when he says here the Nyayikas, it means people who have followed that Nyaya system of philosophy hold that the elements themselves produce some of the sensory organs. They say that the sensory organ of smell, meaning the nose, is produced from the element earth, and so on. This, however, runs counter to what has been stated in the scriptures, namely, the elements are only their nourishing support and nothing more. Right. So there's the logicians, the people who follow the Nyaya school, they have this idea of evolution, and they say that the actual organs, like the nose here, is directly created by the earth, which is the thing which contains odor, right? And that is not supported in the scripture, so therefore we don't accept that. We accept the Sankhya system, which is being described. Having set out in the foregoing paragraphs the manner in which the principles of Mahat, etc., came into being, we now proceed to examine how the Lord makes use of them in his activities, such as the creation of the universe, etc. So now that we got rid of that and we understood the Sankhya system, right? Or at least we've had an entrance into what the Sankhya system talks about. I mean, you could go into a lot of detail here about the Sankhya system. It's not really all that important because it doesn't have any bearing on our everyday life, really. But it's just a basis to understand how the elements evolve from the conglomerate of elements, the Mahat or the Pradhana, the Mula Prakriti. So having set out the aforementioned paragraphs in the manner in which the principles of Mahat came into being, we now proceed to examine how the Lord makes use of them. So the Lord has created all of this, and it's evolved in this way, according to his desire, right? Now, how does he use that in his activities, such as creation of the universe, etc.? Without a combination of all these, effects are not produced. A wall is built out of an aggregate forming mixture of clay, sand, and water. So we have clay, which makes up bricks. We have sand, we have water, if we want to build a wall. So first of all, we have to talk about, if you want to build a wall, the first thing you have to understand is you have to have the ingredients to build a wall. So the first thing is the Lord desired to have this Lila Vibhuti. It was his desire to have this material world. So in order to manifest this material world, first of all, he had to manifest the building blocks of this material world in order to be able to have that Lila, have that particular play. Just like if you want to, the example would be very simple. If you want to show Shakespeare's play or something like that, if you want to show Hamlet, you have to have a stage, you have to have a playhouse, you have to have seats, you have to have an audience, you have to have all these things. You have to have a sound system, you have to have costumes, you have to have all these sort of things. So all of this goes into putting on the play, right? Before you inject the actors, before you have a call out there for actors, right? You have to have all these things ready. So likewise, the Lord mixes all these forces and creates an egg-shaped universe, and in it creates the four-faced Brahma, right? So we've all seen this idea that Mahavishnu is lying and there's a lotus coming from his navel and Brahma is born on the lotus. He's the first created being. dwelling in the heart of so what we've just been discussing up until now about the material nature is not. There's two forms of creation. There's what we call Shristi, and there's two forms of creation. There's the creation by the Lord of the building blocks of nature, and then there's the creation by Brahma, who is more or less an engineer who takes those things and puts them all together and creates the different bodies that we see, creates the different scenarios that we see in the material world, right? So dwelling in the heart of the four-faced Brahma and other individual souls, the Lord, as the internal controller or ruler of all souls, helps to foster the requisite knowledge and resolution in them to create the vast multitude of things. So the Lord himself creates the building blocks of material nature, and then he creates Brahma, and from Brahma others, and then within their heart as the super soul inspires them to use the building blocks of material nature to create what we see today. Thus, after the creation of the elements, they are combined together to create an egg-shaped universe. Brahma, the demiurge, is also created by the Lord and put into the universe. Brahma creates the minor deities, men, animals, etc. He's creating the bodies, right? And the all-pervading Lord watches them all as the internal ruler of all souls. There are several egg-shaped universes. Each one of them comprises 14 worlds, 7 lower, 7 upper worlds, surrounded by 7 fortifications or avarnas. Avarnas means walls or different enclosures. The 7 lower worlds inhabited by the Daityas, Danavas, Panangas, Suparnas, etc. are Atala, Vitala, Vitala, Talatala, Mahatala, Sutala, and Patala. Right? These are considered the lower planetary systems like that. This is all Puranic cosmology, and it can be seen in the Puranas like that. It also is analogous also to the body, right? Because within the macrocosm, the understanding of the macrocosm is also an understanding of the microcosm in the body. So it can also be understood like that. It's a meditation. All of these things are a meditation on the Lila Vibhuti, or the material world as created by the Lord, like that. How it can be compared to the scientific understanding that we know today, that's up to you. Some people take all of this stuff as very, very literal. Other people take it as a type of meditation, the understanding of the glories of the Lord and how the Lord manifests the material world, and it can be meditated upon. So, okay, so then we have the upper worlds. So we're talking about 14 worlds. We have the lower worlds, the upper worlds, like Bhuloka, occupied by humans, Bhuvaloka, inhabited by the Gandharvas or angels, right? Swaloka, the region of planets, stars, Indra in power, etc. Mahaloka, the seat of residence of dethroned Indra and others awaiting reinstatement in powers and others. The Janaloka, the abode of the Prajapatis. Tapaloka, another abode of Prajapatis. Satyaloka, the residents of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva and their votaries, who through propitiation of their deities got a life over there. The 7 coverings or fortifications, or again avarnas, enclosures of progressively increasing dimensions of water, fire, air, ether, ahankar, mahat, and avyakta, right? So outside of that, in this universe, outside of these particular planetary systems or places, right? There's a shell which is made of material coverings. The 7 coverings, okay. So they are unto God like sporting accessories or balls to play with. Okay, so that's interesting. So he says these egg-shaped universes are innumerable, and they're like bubbles in an ocean that the Lord plays with, like sporting balls that he plays with. Like water bubbles seen in a vast expanse of water, all these were created all at once, simultaneously, unlike the structures built brick by brick. Okay, the elements. Okay, so it looks like we're going to have a summary here. The elements. Akasha, the spatial ether, provides space for staying and moving about. Vayu, air, is the medium wafting across fragrance, etc. Tejas, or fire, for cooking, heating, and lighting. Jala, water, for wetting, cementing, and cooling. Prithvi, earth, for supporting. The organs, the sensory organs are the ear, skin, eye, tongue, and nose. Apprehend sound, tactile sensations, color, form, taste, smell, respectively. The 5 motor organs. So those are the 5 knowledge. Sensory organs means knowledge acquiring organs, or knowledge acquiring senses. And the 5 motor organs of action are the organ of speech, used for speaking, the organ, the hands for making things, the legs for walking, genitals, and the organ of excretion for those functions, excretory functions, and functions of generating progeny. The manas, or mind, is common to all these activities, as all these functions function only when coordinated by the mind. The attributes of the elements, the sense objects of sound, etc., are the characteristic attributes of the 5 elements. The attribute of spatial ether is sound. That is the air is touch, fire is color and form, water is taste, and earth is odor. So these are the different elements or attributes of elements, one after the other. Perception of the attributes of one element in the other elements, as well as due to the process called as panchikarna, or 5-fold combination. Okay, so there are these 5 material elements, right? Earth, water, fire, air, ether, or sky, right? In the reverse order that I just said them in, that's the order of destruction is like that. The reverse order is the order of creation. It starts out with ether, or air, or sky, right? Then air, then fire, then water, then earth, right? So each one of them has a little bit of one of the others, has an aspect of the others for the Tanmatra, which we discussed before, subtle base, like that. And then there's a doctrine called Panchikarna, which means that when these things are created one out of each other, then they're created with a little bit of each, because each one is created one after the other. Therefore, each one has a little bit of all 5. So this is called Panchikarna, or 5-fold combination. Don't expect to understand it completely from what is just being said here. It's a big topic, but there are other books about it, but it's really not that interesting, and also not that useful, not that important. It's more or less, we can think of it, we can meditate upon it. It's an interesting idea. The 5-fold combinations, the blending of the elements in certain specified proportions. Each element is compounded of half of itself and half of the 4 other elements in equal proportions, right? So this is the whole idea of Panchikarna. So when we say earth, for instance, earth is half earth, and the other half of the earth is divided into 4: air, space, ether, air, water, and fire. Right. So in that way, that's the way earth is made up. Right. But because there's a predominance of earth, it's earth. Like that. That is the idea of Panchikarna. Thus, for example, the element known as Prithvi, or earth, is made up of 50% of earth. The remaining half is made up of 1/8 each. Right. Okay. So you didn't know there was going to be math today, but there's going to be math. Okay. So if we have 1 and we divide it in half, we have 2 halves. If we divide a half into 4, each quarter part of a half is an eighth, right? Right. So therefore, there's an eighth ether, and an eighth water, and an eighth fire, and an eighth air, right? In earth. That's what he's talking about here, right? This is the way material elements are combined. All right. So the remaining half being made up of 1/8 each of the other 4 elements. The spatial ether, by itself too subtle to be visible, however, appears dark because of the 5-fold combination. The dark color is actually a characteristic of earth, and he gives a quotation for that. Yet Krishnam. Krishnam means dark. Tat Prithivi, right? It is also said that the succeeding subtle bases, tanmatras, combined with the preceding subtle bases, the succeeding subtle bases, the tanmatras, combined with the preceding subtle bases, and hence additional features are present in the succeeding bases. I don't know what he means by that. That is how spatial ether has only sound as its attribute. Air has two attributes, namely sound and touch. Oh, I see. Okay. So it's not that each element is completely devoid of the attributes of the other element. So for instance, earth has smell, but it also has taste, it also has touch, it also has form. So it has other attributes as well, right? So when he's talking about preceding and succeeding, he means in the order of evolution, in the order of evolution of from subtle to gross of the material elements. So it has all these three qualities. So then water has all the three qualities, taste, besides taste, while earth has smell in addition to all those four qualities, right? So because it's the last in creation, it's the most gross, earth. So the third category of non-sentient matter, okay, so that was probably the most boring section, right? That is the section about material elements. We don't have to worry about it too much. It's just the Sankya system of evolution of elements. So we talked about the spiritual world. We're talking about matter now. Now the third category of non-sentient things. Yes, there's a third category here. The third category of non-sentient matter is sattva sunya, or that which is devoid of sattva and the other two attributes, namely rajas and tamas. Remember, he talked about these three categories, right? So sattva sunya. So sattva sunya doesn't mean just sattva sunya. It means devoid of sattva, devoid of rajas, and devoid of tamas, devoid of all the three, right? What is that? What is that? A material thing which has no sattva, rajas, or tamas. Okay, I'll tell you what it is. The word sattva here refers to all three attributes. So in this compound sattva sunya, what is devoid of sattva? It means devoid of sattva, it means devoid of rajas, and devoid of tamas, devoid of goodness, passion, ignorance. So under this comes a thing called time. Time is devoid of, there's no sattva time, there's no raja time, there's no tama time, okay? The sattva time is something different than this. It's a third category, right? But it's still a material thing. Time is a material thing. So under that comes time. It is the cause of various transformations of prakriti, right? So it's one of the causes, right? If we look about the five causes of action in the Bhagavad Gita, one of them is time. So time also is a cause or a catalyst for action to occur in this material world of change, right? And it evolves, it evolutes in the sense that the Lord carries out the functions of creation and dissolution at specific times. Further, all changes in the material world are time-related or are conditioned by time. It is subdivided into different times, right? The time passes away at different rates, and we have different names for different lengths of time, let's say. It's subdivided into kala and kashta, the latter being equal to 15 twinklings of the eye, kashta, and the former is the equivalent of 30 kashtas, kala and kashta, 30 kashtas, right? Kala and kashta. Different. Okay, so the twinkling of an eye, the bat of an eyelid, is how they start off measuring time in the Vedic culture. Okay, so then we have 30 kalas equals one muhurta. 30 muhurtas equals a day. meaning a day and night, right? A full day, 24 hours, right? 30 days, 1 month, 2 months, 1 season, three seasons, 1 ayana, or one half of the year, right? 2 ayanas to a year, and so on. See the division and subdivisions of time indicated by Parasara Bhagavan in Vishnu Purana. So if we want to know all these different divisions of time, right, we're just naming different lengths of time, basically. We can look at Vishnu Purana, and Vishnu Purana gives a scale like that. So, I mean, this is just normal that people have this idea of time, and we also have our scientific idea of time based in, seconds, milliseconds, nanoseconds, whatever it is, seconds, and then minutes, and then hours, and then days and weeks and years, etc. Right. So time is eternal. Time is eternal. Right. So just like the material world is eternal, time is also eternal. It is a helpful instrument for the sport of the Lord, and is in the position of a body for him. Right. So just as the rest of material nature, just as the spiritual world and the material world, just all of creation and the souls also are all a body of God, time is also part of the body of God. So God is there within time, just as he is within everything else. So that's the other 2 categories of achit. So that was very simple, right? That was a simple one. Okay. The other 2 categories of achit, right, discussed earlier, namely pure sattva and mixed sattva, are objects of enjoyment, instruments necessary for such enjoyment, and places of enjoyment for the Lord and the individual souls, bhogya, bhogapakarna, and bhogastana. Right. So that's just stating the enjoyment and places of enjoyment for the Lord and the individual souls. And right. So that's just how we say it in Sanskrit. Insofar as heaven, Nitya Vibhuti, is concerned, the objects of enjoyment are divine sounds, forms, etc. The instruments of enjoyment are the celestial things such as ornaments, fans, and parasols. The places of enjoyment are the towers and terraces, halls, and mansions of supernal splendor, like the 1,000-pillared mandap, which the Lord sits inside 7 concentric walls, etc. This side of heaven, the objects of enjoyment for the individual souls are those apprehended by the sense organs. The instruments necessary for such enjoyment are the sense organs of the eyes, etc. The places of enjoyment are all the 14 worlds and the several bodies of various kinds. And for the Lord, the milky ocean where he reclines, which is, as it were, the springboard for his incarnations or avatars, right? Because Vishnu, Kshirodakshara Vishnu, is lying in Svetadweep in the ocean of milk, and from him come the different avatars. His avatars and iconic manifestations, right? These are also in certain places at certain times in this world, right? Are objects and instruments and places of enjoyment this side of heaven, known as Lila Vibhuti. So all of that together is Lila Vibhuti. Pure sattva is bound, pure goodness is bound by the mixed sattva below, and later by the former above. The last category, time, has no such boundaries and thus exists everywhere. Some hold that time is eternal only in the high heaven or Nitya Vibhuti and non-eternal here. Okay, so that's interesting, right? So he's saying that time has no such boundaries, doesn't have a boundary. So time exists there in the spiritual world also. The Buddhists, altogether deny the existence of time. Buddhists deny the existence of time because Buddhists in general are called Shanavada. Shanavada means they believe in momentariness, that everything is different from one moment to the next. So in that sense, they reject continuous time, continuity. But here he's saying that there are some people who say that time is eternal only in the high heaven, in Nitya Vibhuti, and non-eternal here. It's not eternal here. That would probably be the modern scientists, which say that time came out of the Big Bang theory, whatever, like that. So I'm not quite sure what school of philosophy he's referring to that believes that time is non-eternal everywhere. Anyway, but this is refuted, being opposed to one, perception and experience, which reveal all things mobile as well as immobile, time bound, etc. And two, the scriptures, or the Jyotish Shastra or astrology, one of the adjuncts of the Vedas, right, which rests solely on time, which is its very lifeline. Okay, so he's saying that we reject that. We say time is eternal. Okay, the Vaisheshikas. Now he talked about the Buddhists. He talked about the Advaitins. He talked about the Nyayikas, the followers of Nyaya. Now he's talking about this Vaisheshika school, which is one of the other 6 schools. So what have we understood? We've studied about Sankhya. We've studied about Nyaya. We've studied about, and now we're going to talk about Vaisheshikas. The Vaisheshikas and others mention that there is a separate substance called direction. This is also not correct, as one, direction falls within the ambit of Akasha or spatial ether and Prithvi, earth. 2, direction is not absolute, being relative to the observer, right? So for me, what south is south, and for somebody else, what south is not south, right? And so it depends upon the perception of a person, right? Is relative. Direction is relative, and thus, right. So if I say, Honolulu is east of me or west of me, right? Okay, for me it's west, but it's not west. It doesn't have the attribute of being west of everything. It's only west of me because I'm east of it. Okay, so that's the point being made here. So direction is not absolute, being relative to the observer, and thus ceases to be a distinct substance in itself. That is, direction is not a distinct substance in itself. And the direction is determined by relative position of the sun and the earth, east and west being the conventional directions where the sun is said to rise and set. Thus, direction stands included in spatial ether and earth. Some Buddhists say that Akasha or sky or ether, spatial ether, unlike the other elements, Prithvi, is not something concrete or positive. There were some scientists who said this too, that we say that ether is a vacuum, that there is no ether. It's just an absence of air or an absence of anything, right? But merely the absence of a covering or barrier, a varna. According to them, it is nothing more than a mere expression incapable of direct perception. So they have this idea that there's a void, but there is no actual void. There's no absolute void. This again is incorrect, as spatial ether has a positive form as denoted by observation. The hawk flies here. Well, I'm not exactly, I don't know that proves it for me, but there are proofs that ether is a thing. The eagle flies over there. I think there's an experiment that you see when you're in school, like you have a vacuum, you have a light inside, electric light inside a glass case, right? Which, I mean, any light bulb is like this. Inside is a vacuum. There's no air. And yet the light goes through, the light travels through, right? So how did the light travel through? What is the light made of, right? The light traveled through the void. I mean, we just look up at the sun. The light is traveling through a void and coming to us like that. So there must be a medium through which it travels. It's not nothingness, right? So that medium is ether. So some others, the Nyayikas and Vaisheshikas, hold that Akash is eternal, or ether is eternal without components, all-pervading and invisible. This theory is not acceptable, as spatial ether is of the offshoot of the tamasa variety, right, of Ahankara, known as Bhutadi. Okay, so well, all the elements are offshoots of Bhutadi, right, of tamasic Ahankara. We just talked about the Sankhya system is that all of them come from that, all the gross elements. So therefore, it cannot be eternal, right? It can't be eternal because we explained the evolution of it. If something evolves from something, it's not eternal, right? That's obvious, right? So the Vaisheshikas and Nyayikas are wrong about that. As it is itself a component of Bhutadi, there is no question of it being without parts. We also discussed that, how with Panchikarna, there's an admixture of all the, in all of the different gross elements, there's this admixture of half of that gross element and an eighth of each of the other four, right? And therefore it can't be without parts, right? So it is not all pervading, as it is not found in two types of ahankaras. It's not all pervading. It's not all pervading. I'm not exactly sure about that point though, because it is not found in the other two types of ahankaras. The other two types of ahankaras. The other two types of ahankaras, meaning the sattvic ahankara, which is vaikarika, and the rajasic, which is the taijasa, right? So it's not found there. So therefore, it's only found in the bhutadi or the tamasic type of ahankara. It's an evolute of that. So therefore, it can't be considered eternal or all-pervading, right? All-pervading. Well, eternal we dealt with. It can't be all-pervading, right? Because it doesn't pervade those other forms of ahankara. So as it has a form due to the fivefold combination of elements, which we just discussed, as already explained, and is thus visible, right? It is not correct to say that it's imperceptible, right? So even people who say that the void or the ether, right, is somehow imperceptible, that's not true either. We can perceive the void. We can perceive it. We, just like for example, I'll give you an example of air. How do we know that there's air? Like when the wind blows and it blows the leaves of a tree and the branches of a tree, we see the tree move and we see the leaves move. So we don't see the air. So just because you don't see the void doesn't mean it's not there. Just because you don't see ether, it doesn't mean it's not there. You can perceive it through different means. So you don't have to see it. So even you don't see the form of air. Air is invisible, but you see what it does. You see its interaction with other elements, like the earth and the solid elements of a tree. So okay, so as it has a form due to the five-form combination of elements, is already explained and is thus visible, it's not correct to say that it's imperceptible. Again, the view advanced by these schools, what are we talking about? We're talking about the schools of Nyaya and Vaisheshika. Nyaya and Vaisheshika, these schools, is that air, vayu, is imperceptible, is also fallacious, as the tactile sense experiences the presence and impact of air. If I go out in a big storm, I feel the wind blow against me. I feel it. Therefore, because I feel it, it exists, right? I've sensed it. So to say it's imperceptible is incorrect. Air is not imperceptible. We can see what the air does when it blows the leaves of the tree. And we not only that, we can exactly feel it. So we can see it and we can feel it. How can it be imperceptible? It's not imperceptible. And therefore, we don't accept these views of the Nyaya school and the Vaisheshika school. If you really want to be bored out of your mind, we could discuss these schools, the Nyaya school, Vaisheshika school, the different, these basic doctrinal schools of what's called the Sadoshanas. I taught one class on this, comparative class on this, and everybody was so bored out of their minds that we never taught it again. Okay, so it's quite a boring topic. Okay, so we're getting to the end of this topic here. Okay, so there are several varieties of fire. So we talked about ether, now we talked about air, now we're talking about fire, okay? So there are several varieties of fire. Fire, light, the light of the moon is a type of fire, the light of the sun is a type of fire. being the earthly variety, and the celestial variety, right? So there's a celestial variety, light coming from the sun and the moon, we get light, right? Then there's a gastric variety of fire. We talk about the fire of digestion. When we eat, we offer oblations into the fire of digestion, just like we offer sacrifice into the fire of into the sacrifice of fire. When we do fire sacrifice, it's the same. When we eat, we do the same thing. We offer the ghee and the grains into the fire of digestion. We offer them to the Lord within as representative of Vaishvanaraya. He's the indwelling soul of the fire of digestion. Okay, so the gastric variety of fire is also there. And that which is found in gold. Gold has this brilliance by itself. It's always brilliant. It never fades. It never tarnishes. And so therefore it's said to have a type of fire like that. It has that quality of always shining, right? Okay, so there are these different types. The solar fire is everlasting, right? Well, as long as the sun lasts, I guess it's there. While the earthly fire, like fire, light, goes as long as we don't put out the fire or turn off the light, right? That's on, right? Are impermanent. Okay, so you can say the solar fire is permanent, but actually this is also incorrect, because at the end of creation, there's no sun, all the stars, everything will go back to that conglomeration of Mula Prakriti or Pradana, whatever, or Mahat, whatever it's called, right, where everything is homogeneous. So that statement is not actually 100% correct. So the solar fire, in that sense, is not eternal. We know that, right? Stars explode, stars turn into other things, and their light is finished. Okay, so they're also impermanent, right? So the natural color of fire is red. Okay, red or whatever, and it is hot for the touch. The water is of white color. The natural color of white is white. I don't know how they get white from water, but it's maybe it's a mistranslation here. Water is normally, the water that comes out of my tap is normally, not white, but it's translucent. It's invisible. It's like it has no color. Right, takes on the color of whatever's next to it. If they put it in a red cup, it's red. Okay, so water is white in color, natural color, cold and to touch, and is sweet. The earth, these are just this is just part of the Sankhya school. These are all statements that are coming from Sankhya, like that. So in general, Sri Vaishnavas, we accept the Sankhya system in toto. Totally, we accept that system of creation as being logical, like that, without needing to going into the details of it. But here in this book, he's gone into the details of it. So, okay, here's the last details. Right, the earth has forms and tastes of various kinds. Earth and air are neither hot nor cold to touch. They can be hot sometimes, they can be cold. Okay, so like that. Okay, so that is the end of the middle section, or so we covered the soul, we covered the matter, the universe, different forms of achit. So chit, achit, right? So now we get to, this is the good part, is we're going to talk about section 3, which is Ishvara, God, right? So I think we can probably leave it there. If there's any questions or comments, that is the most boring part. The middle part, which has got to do with the Sankhya system. The Sankhya system, as I said, there's two Sankhya systems. There's a Nirishvara Sankhya, and there's a Ishvara Sa Ishvara or Saishvara Sankhya. There's one form of Sankhya that believes that there is God who put all these things into motion, who evolved the material nature and all the other things, and from which everything emanates. And then there's another form, which is Nirishvara Sankhya, which has an idea that all these things came about without God, without a source, without a creation, without a creator to create. The creation came without a creator. Okay, so those two schools. Obviously, we belong to the school that the creation was created by a creator. Okay, so I don't think, it doesn't need, this kind of an understanding of material nature doesn't need to conflict in my opinion, doesn't need to conflict with our modern understandings, right? So we don't need to deny modern science. They have another way of sort of looking at everything. This is a sort of Vedic way of looking at things, and some of it we don't need to take literally. We can take it as a meditation upon the glories of the Lord. The Lord has ananta kalyana gunas. He has unlimited auspicious qualities. One of his auspicious qualities and attributes is the soul. One of his auspicious qualities and attributes is the material nature. So chit and achit are his qualities. They're his body, and they're his qualities, they're his attributes. They're part of the attributes of God, and therefore we can meditate upon them in certain ways, right? Which will help us to understand that we are not matter, and also to understand, if we meditate on the soul, we can understand the true nature of the soul as being the property, the slave, the servant of God. So this is the purpose of knowing all these things. Otherwise, there's no real purpose to knowing all these things, right? But if it is to help us to understand our true nature and the true nature of reality in the sense of the universe, right? And then when we understand those two things, we understand that we actually should have nothing to do with this material universe. We should have to do with the spiritual universe and the Supreme Lord. So that's the point. That's the point of studying these things. And therefore, the next part is going to be nice, because we're going to talk directly about, we've been talking about the Lord all along. We've been talking about the soul, and we've been talking about the universe, which are attributes of the Lord, which are parts of the Lord in a sense. So they are all permeated by the Lord, and they are all supported by the Lord. They are all controlled by the Lord. So therefore, this is also spiritual discussion, but it's indirect. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, in the 7th chapter, look it up, that there are these 8 material, gross and subtle elements, and they are bina prakritiya. These are my separated material elements. Because they're separated, therefore a meditation upon them and a discussion about them, right, is indirect to discussion of the Lord. Now we're going to, the third part, we're going to talk about directly about the Lord, about Ishvara. We're going to learn, something about what it says in the Shastras about Ishvara. Okay, so if you're not asleep, any questions or comments?
I really liked it, even though, yes, I wouldn't go over it again or in much more detail. I really like that. It's
like that shot in the arm. You have to have it, but
yeah,
you don't really want it.
Now, the time bit was really interesting. Just a bit, little question, maybe not related to COVID next. We said that time is eternal. Time is the body of Ishvara.
Everything is the body of Ishvara. Everything is the body of Ishvara. So time isn't different because it's the body of Ishvara, right? Everything is the body of Ishvara.
Correct.
Everything is his attribute. What's the question?
And then creates a new setup for a new Leela, right? According to how we saw merging different things. How does this changes in how does this impacts karma in single souls that are embodied?
How does time impact the
if
soul?
I'm a certain actor in a previous Leela, will I be the same actor the next one?
The same actor?
Or if I haven't improved my karma. How does it work? Karma
if you haven't improved,
you're to the soul.
You're an actor in a group of actors, right? And you're asking about the next production. You're in a particular production right now, and you're playing a part. And in your next life, in the next play, you may be the lead, or you may be an understudy, or you may be a minor character. Who knows? So that's according to our karma.
Okay,
right.
So it doesn't get the soul at the end of a production.
I'm sorry. Say again. What
is karma eternal as well? Then
is karma eternal? Karma is not eternal. Karma cannot be eternal. How can karma be eternal? Now, karma is beginningless for one class of soul, or two classes of soul, let's say. The classes of soul that are here in this material world have a nadi karma. They have beginningless karma. When they're from time immemorial, they've been associated with material nature, and therefore they've created karma. So they have different types of karma: prarabdha, sanchita, and agama karma. They have these different types of karma which create the bodies, right? The different levels of rajas, tamas, and sattva means I get a particular type of body and consciousness, and I'm put into a particular situation, which is my play that I'm my life today. Okay, so karma. Okay, so I'll give you an example mathematically, right? So we have, for instance, we have something. We have different sets in math. In maths, we have different sets. We can say the set of whole numbers. What is the set of whole numbers? Whole positive numbers. Starting at 0, there's and going to infinity, we have a certain set of numbers. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can keep counting until I come to infinity, right? So I can keep going counting to infinity. So therefore, there's an infinite number. There's an infinite, that is a set which starts at 0. The set of positive numbers, the set of positive whole numbers in mathematics starts at 0 and goes to infinity. There's an infinite number there's an infinite number there, and it goes to infinity, right? There's also a set of all numbers, all whole numbers. Not just positive whole numbers, but all whole numbers. So -1, -2, -3, that is also a set. That's an infinite set of numbers that goes to infinity, positive infinity, and to negative infinity, right? So mathematicians talk about that set as being twice as big. The numbers, the number of elements in that set are twice as big as the numbers in the first set of positive. There's positive whole numbers, and there's a set of positive whole numbers and the set of whole numbers in general. Whole numbers in general is twice as big. The number of elements is twice as big. Now, both number of elements is infinite, but one is twice as big as the other. Then there's another set of elements of all numbers, which includes decimals and fractions. So there's an infinite number of decimals and fractions between 0 and 1, between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, right? 2.1, 2.11, 2.111, 2.112, 2.113, right? So there's an infinite number between each element there. So there's the number, if I say all numbers, right? The elements in that set are infinitely more than the elements in the individual elements in the two sets I said before, the positive whole numbers and all whole numbers, right? However, so when we talk about karma being infinite or being eternal, it goes on for infinity, right? There's different types of eternality. There's one type of eternality. We were eternally associated with karma, but karma has an end. Karma has an end. It has no beginning. There's some things that have no beginning but have an end. There's other things which have no end but have a beginning, like moksha. When the soul becomes liberated from this material world, right? He begins his service in Vaikuntha. He begins his direct association with the Lord. That has no end, but it does begin at a certain time. His eternal service begins at a certain time. His liberation begins at a certain time. It never ends. He doesn't come back here, right? Na punaravate. In the end of the Vedanta Sutra, it says he never returns, right? Even in the Gita, it says he never returns. Okay, so it begins at a certain point and never ends. So moksha begins at a certain time, liberation begins at a certain time and never ends. Karma never begins but ends at a certain time. So there are other things which begin and end, which are here in this material world. There are things that, like this life begins at a certain point, ends at a certain point. So, but the soul itself is eternal, never begins, never ends. But the condition that the soul is in can begin and end. The condition that the soul, embodied soul, never begins, but it can end. When the soul attains liberation, that condition ends for the soul. The condition of the Nityasuris, right, never begins and never ends. So karma cannot be eternal. Karma is not eternal. If karma were eternal, then there could be no moksha. There could be no liberation. Because we know the Lord explains to us about liberation, right? Therefore, karma must come to an end. Karma has to come to an end. Now, some people might say that karma is like matter, and it doesn't get created or destroyed, but it only gets maybe transformed. So maybe you have karma, and maybe your karmas never end, but your karmas get transferred to some other person at the time of your liberation. Some people might have a theory like that. I don't know if there's a lot of people who would believe that, like that. So as far as karma is concerned, we have to think about our own individual karmas, which attach to the bound soul, and when they're finished, they're finished. They're gone. They're destroyed, or they're not. They're not. We're not in contact with them. So, what exactly happens to the residual karma? Vedanta Deshika has a statement where he talks in Rahasya Trayasara. He says that a prapana, a person who's surrendered to God at the end of this life, he's going to go to liberation. He's going to be saved by the Lord. What happens to his residual karma? So Vedanta Deshika says that his good karma, his punyas, his good activities, the karma from his good activities is distributed to his friends, and his bad activities are distributed to his enemies. I mean, I don't know what Tengalacharya say about that, but to me, that's just like, who knows, who cares what happens with the residual karma. To me, it's like karma is there to help us get out of this material world. If we're on the path and we're going to be saved, and we're going to be taken from this material world by the Lord, we're going to be saved, right? We're going to attain liberation. Then the Lord is somehow going to nullify that karma, if there's any left. That's going to be nullified. So exactly the mechanism by how he does that, I don't know. Vedanta Deshika, I think, is guessing here too when he says that, because I don't know. We can look in Rahasya Trayasara and we can see if he has any scriptural statement that says that. But to me, that's very suspect, because the whole idea of karma is that if I do something, I get the reaction. So why should I get somebody else's reaction, either good or bad? Like that. If one of my friends dies, why do I end up with his good karma and his bad karma heaped on top of mine? That doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't seem fair to me, right? So I know life is not always fair, but let's say it doesn't sit right with me. So I'm not a subscriber to all of these little. There's some slight points of Vedanta Deshika, obviously, that we don't subscribe to. But it's a good question. We can discuss what happens to the residual karma of the prapana at the time of liberation, where the person gets liberated. What happens to his residual karma, or whether that residual karma is destroyed? It's because, see, also I was discussing about the word. Maybe it was in another class, discussing about the word japa and the word moksha. So japa, jama nishad papanasana, papanashana, even the word diksha, right, or initiation, diksha, has this ksha in it. Moksha has ksha in it. Diksha has ksha in it. Japa has pa in it. So these syllables, ksha and pa, ksha means to destroy. So when we say diksha, divyaganam yatoda yad kuri papasya samsayam tasmat diksha disapokta deshikais tattva vidahi. This is one definition of diksha, right? The word diksha is a compound, and it's made up of diyate and shiyate. So diyate means something's given, the mantra is given, the surrender to the Lord is given, right? And what something is destroyed. What is destroyed is the sin. The sin is destroyed. Also, we feel like this when we offer something to the Lord. We get rid of the sin from it. So we offer ourselves to the Lord. The sin is destroyed. We offer ourselves. We offer food to the Lord. Any sin that relates to the food or something like that is destroyed and becomes pure, like that. So by offering something to the Lord, including ourselves, hopefully that sin is destroyed, that karma is destroyed, right? So like that. So that's the meaning of diksha, the meaning of moksha, the meaning of papa nasanam. Papa nasana means to destroy the sin. Sin is destroyed. It's not transferred to somebody else. So that's why when I hear statements like that from Hasitraya Sara of Vedanta Deshika saying, oh, I think it's just a cop-out. Personally, I think it's an easy way of saying, okay, you've asked me a question. I just want to get rid of that question. I don't care to give you a proper answer. So I'm going to give you this answer, which, shuts you up and gets you away. I really don't know what happens to the karma of a prapana at the time of his liberation. For those persons who think maybe karma goes on, right? Karma has some life of its own beyond the personality that it's attached to, the soul that is attached to. Then okay, so then maybe they have to work that out. Personally, there's other books like Achirati Marga by Pilay, which describes the actual transition of the soul to Vaikuntha. That will be interesting to see. Maybe that discusses it. The whole idea of karma is anadi. It's beginningless, but it does have an end. So how it comes to the end, right? So your question originally was, karma is, can we understand karma to be eternal? Karma is beginningless. It's not eternal. It doesn't go on forever, right? It's eternal. It's infinite in the sense that it was beginningless, right? Just like that, I gave you the mathematical example that there's a set of negative numbers, set of negative whole numbers, start at negative infinity and go to zero, and at zero they end. The set ends. It's an infinite set which ends at zero. So karma is an infinite set that ends at zero. The positive numbers is like moksha. Moksha is an infinite set that starts at zero. At the time of moksha, it starts and it goes on for infinity. So in that sense, karma and moksha are like the opposites. They're the antithesis of each other. How we transfer over from karma to moksha, that's the question. And that's an interesting question, no doubt. And I don't think just by saying, okay, so whatever's left over, we give to your friends and relatives and enemies. That to me isn't a full explanation, and therefore I don't. First of all, I don't understand it. Second of all, I don't think that that's a full explanation. Maybe Vedanta Deshika has a deeper explanation for what he's saying, like that. I'd be very interested. We can look at Rahasya Trayasara and we can see what he says exactly, and if he has any quotes to back it up. But in any case, it does stop. Karma does stop at a certain point, and there is no karma after that point for that living being who attains moksha, like that. Now, if the question is what happens to that karma, does that karma continue? Is it a substance which adheres to other living beings or whatever? I don't know, and I don't. It's never really talked about like that, because my understanding is that karma, and I think most people's understanding is that karma accrues to a person who performs the activities, who is a part of that chain. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are 5 causes of action. The Lord is one of them. It doesn't adhere to him. Karma does not adhere to him, right? It's resolved in him, if anything, right? But it adheres to the soul. It adheres to the individual soul, just like smoke can cover the spark. It can never cover the full fire. It covers the smoke because the smoke is very small. So whether that smoke is completely dissipated at the time of liberation, or whether that smoke is still there, but is simply covering a different spark, or I think every spark, every soul has got its own karma, and therefore I don't see why. To me, it's not fair that I should suffer or enjoy the sins or pious activities of others. Why? Why would I do that? Why would the Lord do that to me? Doesn't make much sense. So again, it's a good question. Is karma eternal? Karma is not eternal. Karma is beginningless, but it has an end. So something which is beginningless and has an end is not eternal. Something which has a beginning and has no end is also not eternal. So in that sense, the baddhas, the baddha jivas, the bound souls, and the released souls, the muktas, they do not enjoy eternal karma. They also do not enjoy eternal liberation, in the sense of it being eternal. If we define eternal as being endless and beginningless, there's different types. What I'm trying to say is eternal is, we're not using the right terms here. We're using the word eternal. When I say something is eternal in English, I usually mean it has no beginning and has no end. That's not what I mean when I say karma is eternal or moksha is eternal. Moksha is endless. Karma is beginningless. Karma has an end. Moksha can have a beginning. For some people, moksha has no beginning. For the Nityasuris, for those personalities who are eternally the servants of God, they're eternally, for them, there's no beginning and no end of moksha. So moksha can be eternal in the sense of having no beginning and no end, but only for the Nityasuris. For the baddhas, for the bound souls, moksha will have a beginning at the time of liberation, but no end. They also have beginningless karma, which has an end, which can have an end, like that. Now, there are some other schools like Madhva. Madhva believes that there are certain souls for which karma will never end. They will be eternally either in this material world, in the middle, or they will going round and round in samsara, or they will be in hell eternally. So according to Madhva, there are three types of souls, and they are rajasic, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic souls. The soul itself has the attribute of either rajas, sattva, rajas, or tamas. That's according to Madhva. So I don't know anybody who, outside of the Madhvas, who believes that, right? There's no school of Vedanta that other school of Vedanta that believes that. No school of Vedanta believes in eternal hell except for Madhva. In that case, my personal opinion is he's being influenced by Christian influences. That in that side of India where he was, there were Christian influences that came in, and the Christians believe in eternal hell, and therefore he somehow adopted it. But anyway, so sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, he calls the sattvic souls muktas, right? They will eventually, they cannot help it. Eventually, over the period of one kalpa, right, they will eventually, no matter what they do or no matter how bad they try to be, eventually, because they're sattvic souls, they will get moksha and go to Vaikuntha. Of course, they have to wait till the end of the creation, and they all go with Brahma. They all go along with Brahma. This is Madhva philosophy. Okay, so and then there's two other types. There's the rajasic soul. The rajasic soul is going to go around and around. Sometimes he's in heaven, sometimes he's in hell. He goes around and around, gets different bodies, enjoys different karmas, that he's in samsara eternally. He's rajasic soul. He can never leave samsara. He can never get liberation. He can never go to hell eternally. Then third type is called a tamayogan. That tamayogan is a tamasic soul. That tamasic soul, he can do as much japa, do as much bhakti, do as much harinam, kirtan, whatever he wants to do, he can do, but only up to one kalpa. At the end of one kalpa, his bad tendency, his sattvic, his tamasic nature will come out, right? And he will be then damned, and he will go to hell, and he will be in hell forever. That is Madhva's philosophy. Three types of souls: One has to be liberated. One has to stay in the material world up and down, round and round. And the third one will eventually go to hell and stay there forever. That is Madhva's philosophy. Really, really turned me off Madhva when I read that. Okay, and do not know why anybody would be attracted to that type of philosophy. Of course, the kicker is that you can't really know. You can't know. Somebody may be dressed like a sannyasi, somebody may be dressed like a beggar, but he may be a sattvic soul, or he may be the sannyasi may be a tamasic soul. Who knows? Madhva's idea is that only after one kalpa of working it out in this material world does that happen, that we figure out the destination of that soul, like that. And Madhva's philosophy is also that all souls go through this. He says it would be unfair for there to be nityasuris, for there to be people who are eternally liberated. So God throws everybody down here. All the souls are here, right? Like that. They're all divided into three classes. But I mean, it's to me, it's eminently unfair. To most people, it's eminently unfair that God creates a soul that is destined for hell. The perfection of the tamasic soul, according to Madhva, is to go to hell. That's his perfection. The perfection of the rajasic soul is to stay in the material world and go round and round in samsara. Doesn't sound like too much perfection to me. And only the sattvic soul gets to go to liberation and moksha, and that's his perfection. So this is Madhva philosophy, and it just sometimes you think when you read some of these philosophies, you think, did these guys actually believe this, or did they just want to be different from the other guys? Did they just look at the other schools and say, hey, how can we distinguish ourselves from this other school? Let's just say something completely off the wall and propound this, and then see if anybody accepts it. I don't know, but they have their reasoning, they have their logic, and they have their quotations from scriptures and things like that. There's some interesting books. Vedanta Deshika has written some books about Adhikarana Saravali and Tattva Mukta Kalapa and some things where he discusses different schools, and we can and defeats some of these crazy notions, just as like we defeated some of the notions here of the Nyaya and Vaisheshika schools. So like that, we should remember that out of the 6 schools, the Saddarshanas, the 6 main schools of Indian philosophy, the ancient schools, Vedanta became the winner. These schools wrote and argued against each other for thousands of years, and ultimately Vedanta came out on top. So the Vedanta system is now, there are different flavors of Vedanta, and today we have basically 2 or 3, which we can say are the main ones. So we have Advaita. Shankara's Advaita is very popular. Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja. And then we have maybe the Dvaita of Madhva, like that. But as I said, Madhva, there's a lot of people have a lot of misgivings about Madhva. So some people say you'll find books about the three great Vedantins, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, and they'll talk about and even my Sanskrit teacher, Dr. Chirnarayan, he'll talk about in order to fully understand the Vedanta Sutras, you should understand Shankara, the Advaita side, you should understand the Dvaita side, and then you'll really understand the Vishishtadvaita side. But really, we have to say, in general, Advaita is the most popular, let's say, the most popular school. But although there are a lot of people who are quasi-Advaita, they don't really know Advaita well. They just think, yeah, that sounds good, that sounds right. So let's accept that, and it's easy. But the people who really know Advaita well, they're probably less. The people who know Vishishtadvaita well, that's anybody that knows these systems very well, is probably less. And these systems are at odds with each other. There's a lot of truth in Advaita also. In the Vedanta, there's a lot of truth in that. Well, why is Ramanuja's system is called Vishishtadvaita? It's a type of Advaita. It's a type of oneness, but it includes difference, right? So there are many schools that include oneness and difference. Nimbarka, Vallabha, Chaitanya, all these schools include difference and some sort of oneness. But where you see the schools where they completely negate the oneness or they completely negate the difference, is the fanatical schools. And the schools that are more in the middle, they have an understanding of some oneness, some difference, because both those things are there in Vedanta. It's like that. So this is the cutting edge discussion since the last 1,000 years, since Vedanta basically took over, more than 1,000 years, since Shankara, let's say. So about 1,500 years, has been on different aspects of Vedanta, but it's been Vedanta. So these other things, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, blah, 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 all these schools have been defeated. And parts of them are also truth. There's a little bit of truth in Vaisheshika, in Nyaya, in Sankhya, there's more, like that. So Vedanta Deshika and some of the acharyas, they explain that, because it's, I've said this before, when you go to court, they ask you to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay, so there is truth in a lot of these systems. There's a little bit of truth. Some things are true, some things are wrong. So we have to sort those things out, accept the things which are true. We can accept the things which are true, and we can reject the things which we find to be untrue, like that. So Vishishtadvaita is a happy medium. We have the practicality of the Pancharatra system. We have the devotional fervor of the and longings of the Alwars in the Divya Prabandham, and we have the Vedanta philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, which is not fanatical Advaita and not fanatical Dvaita. Like that. So we have something in between like that. So maybe you see, if you look on the internet today, you'll see a lot of Gaudiyas, because Gaudiyas spread out all over the world because of ISKCON and Prabhupada. And you'll see a lot of people pushing Achintya Beta Tattva, this type of Vedanta, like that. All of this is coming from Ramanuja's. Ultimately, Ramanuja is the one who reacted to Shankara and said, no, this fanatical monism is not right. There is something more to it than just fanatical Advaita and monism. There is some dualism involved here, like that. So in any sense, I mean, we can, it's all very well and good to study all these defunct philosophies, and a lot of them are not even practical philosophies. Even Advaita, if you take it to the extreme, it's not a practical philosophy at all. So that's why when we're reading Yadindra Madhudipika, the very first thing he says that Ramanuja says that knowledge is important, but it has to be practical too. So just getting into all these philosophical discussions and getting into the nitty gritty in the minute details of all these doctrines and things is interesting, but ultimately it has to be practical. If you come to the conclusion philosophically that everything's one and nothing exists, and there's no, if you become a Buddhist and nothing exists, then why would you do anything? If you could become an Advaitin and everything is one, then why would you do anything? So there's no the impetus for action, the impetus for life is not there ultimately in these other doctrines. Whereas Vishishtadvaita is a very vibrant living philosophy, which is a philosophy of religion, which can be practiced. We practice what we preach. Whereas the others, they don't practice what they preach. Buddhists don't practice what they preach. How can they practice what they preach? They preach nothing. So how can you practice that? And Advaitins practice, they preach oneness. How can you practice that? In practical life, how can that be practiced? It can't be. So anyway, next time we'll talk about Ishvara, and hopefully that'll be a little bit more interesting. If you want to go deeply into this idea about the nature of karma more, there's lots and lots of books about that. There's lots and lots of things that we can say about that, but it's beyond the scope of this particular text.